Hello, and happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day, everyone. My name is Ben Anderson. I'm a ranger at the Maggie L. National Historic Site here in Richmond, Virginia. If I was to tell you that we're going to spend the next several minutes exploring the history of an important boycott over segregated seating in the world of public transportation, you might think, especially today, that we're going to focus entirely on the Montgomery bus boycott of 1955, which was famously led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But did you know that a half a century earlier, Maggie L. Walker co-led a similar boycott right here in Richmond, one that lasted twice as long as the boycott in Montgomery and was even researched by Dr. King himself? Well, if you're like a lot of first-time visitors that we see here at the site, your answers to those questions are probably no. So I wanted to take a moment to explore the story of Maggie L. Walker and the 1904 Richmond streetcar boycott, a story that not only connects the lives of Maggie L. Walker and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but also helps to reveal the important early roots of the modern civil rights movement. By the 1950s, racial segregation had invaded just about every aspect of life, particularly in the South. But its legal foundations were actually laid in the world of public transportation at the turn of the 20th century. In 1896, the United States Supreme Court ruled that segregating the races on passenger trains was actually constitutional as long as it was done under separate but equal circumstances. Armed with this new legal precedent, southern states like Virginia began to pass laws mandating segregation in modes of transportation. Virginia began by segregating its passenger trains in 1900, then moved to do the same with steamboats in 1901. By 1904, even though the state had yet to pass a law mandating segregation on streetcars, they had effectively disenfranchised nearly its entire black population by adopting a host of voting restrictions in its 1902 state constitution. So, in the spring of 1904, when the Virginia Passenger and Power Company announced that it was about to enforce segregation on streetcars in Richmond, it did so to a black community that was eager to fight back. At the beginning of the 20th century, Richmond, Virginia, the former capital of the Confederacy, was home to one of the largest and most prosperous black populations in America. And few people personified that success better than Maggie L. Walker. After being elected head of an insurance-based fraternal organization called the Independent Order of St. Luke in 1899, Walker was soon catapulted into the national spotlight as a successful entrepreneur, after establishing a newspaper in 1902 called the St. Luke Herald, and then becoming the nation's first black woman to charter a bank and become a bank president with the opening of the St. Luke Penny Savings Bank in 1903. That next year, as word of the impending segregation on Richmond's streetcars began to spread, Walker banded with local leaders to push back. In the early days of the boycott, Walker got together with other black bank presidents in Richmond and explored the idea of establishing a black-owned transportation company to use as an alternative to riding the streetcars. And while nothing is known to have come of that idea, Walker did turn to her newspaper to publish stirring editorials in support of the boycott, like this one from June of 1904. Distances are no greater in these days than in the days when there were no trolley cars. Burdens are no heavier now than there were before trolley cars were invented. Storms and sunshine affect us no differently from what they did before the advent of trolley cars. So why the surrender of principle? From one end of the country to another, the eyes of the nation are upon the action of the colored people of Richmond. Motivated by strong leaders like Walker and a whole host of alternative ideas such as walking, hitching rides in carriages, and even refurbishing old bicycles, black Richmonders found lots of ways to maintain their boycott of Richmond streetcars. When the Virginia Power and Passenger Company declared bankruptcy in the summer of 1904, boycott leaders were quick to declare victory, but that proved premature when the company's successor moved in and quickly announced that it was only going to maintain the policy of segregation on the streetcars. Histories of the boycott differ in some ways, but they tend to agree that it finally came to an end in the summer of 1906, following the state's passage of a law that mandated segregation on the streetcars. What had started as an effort to simply convince a company to stop enforcing a rule they were choosing to enforce had now transformed into an effort to overturn state law. And for a population largely sapped of its political power, this simply proved too much. So the boycott in Richmond may have come to an end, but the war over legalized racial segregation was far from over. By the end of the first decade of the 20th century, there had been nearly 24 boycotts waged over segregated seating on southern streetcars. And while none of them could claim to have ended segregation as a practice, their effectiveness could be measured by the severe legal backlash that many of them inspired. And that was true, as it turns out, both in Virginia and in Alabama. When Claudette Colvin and later Rosa Parks were arrested for refusing to give up their seats to white passengers on Montgomery buses back in 1955, they were arrested on the charge that they were violating a state law mandating segregation on Montgomery buses. But in February of 1956, when Dr. King was arrested, his charge was altogether different. King was charged with violating a state anti-boycott law that could be traced all the way back to 1903, a law that was written in response to successful streetcar boycotts in Montgomery and Mobile, and was designed to never let boycotts like that ever happen again. Well, despite King's arrest, the Montgomery bus boycott would continue for a little over 1 year and was successful not just at desegregating buses in Montgomery, but throughout the entire nation. The boycott helped catapult Dr. King into the national spotlight, paving the way for holidays such as this one, and of course proved a pivotal moment in the early years of the modern civil rights movement. Many years later, it was revealed that while planning the Montgomery bus boycott, Dr. King sought out information on the Richmond streetcar boycott of 1904. What he learned from it, including potential details about Maggie L. Walker's involvement, may never be known. But is a moment that reminds us not only how connected these two movements were, but of the awesome power that history gives us to reach back, draw inspiration from the courage of our ancestors, giving us the strength to go out into the world and make it a better place.